And up to where we got to last week, end of chapter 6, it's gone really, really well. The walls are complete, the gates are in place. Sure, there's been opposition. Of course, it's been hard work, but Nehemiah's great visionary project has been an amazing success. Then we get to Nehemiah Chapter 7. And suddenly we find that he has to ask his biggest request yet of the Jewish people. It feels like chapter 1 is complete, but now they have to give their entire lives to a much bigger project. If you've got a Bible, please turn to Nehemiah chapter 7. We'll dive straight into the Bible today. And keep a finger in Nehemiah chapter 11 as well, because we're going to look at that too. And the word should be on the screen behind me. There we are. Let's dive in. After the wall had been rebuilt and I had set the doors in place, the gatekeepers and the singers and the Levites were appointed. I put in charge of Jerusalem my brother Hanani, along with Hananiah, the commander of the citadel, because he was a man of integrity and feared God more than most men do. I said to them, the gates of Jerusalem are not to be opened until the sun is hot. Now, just to pause for a moment, on the screen behind me, you can see a rough perimeter of Jerusalem in Nehemiah's day. The gates that he is referring to are right the way around the city, but the next slide up, you can see what they may well have looked like. That's the eastern gate. The walls there, in some places, are up to 10 feet thick. These are meaty walls. And when Nehemiah says, don't open the gates until the sun is hot, what essentially he's saying is this: we're going to open the gates late and close them early. And the only moment that they are going to be open is the time when all the enemy nations round about are most likely going to be enjoying their afternoon siesta. They're not going to want to attack the city in their military uniform when the sun is at its peak in the sky. This is just very wise military planning by Nehemiah. Back to chapter 7, second half, verse 3. While the gatekeepers are still on duty, make them shut the doors and bar them. Also, appoint residents of Jerusalem as guards, some at their posts and some near their own houses. Now, the city was large and spacious, but there were few people in it, and the houses had not yet been rebuilt. So my God put it into my heart to assemble the nobles, the officials, and the common people for registration by families. I found the genealogical record of those who had been the first to return. This is what I found written there. And essentially, the rest of the chapter is a long list of names and numbers detailing the people who'd returned to Israel from exile across the Persian Empire. Now, we're going to flick across to Nehemiah chapter 11. A couple of reasons for that. Firstly, most commentators think it naturally flowed on from chapter 7 and was one part of one longer narrative. The second reason is, even if it's not, it's about the same subject, the re-inhabiting of Jerusalem. So Nehemiah chapter 11 and the first couple of verses. Now the leaders of the people settled in Jerusalem, and the rest of the people cast lots to bring one out of every 10 to live in Jerusalem, the holy city, while the remaining 9 were to stay in their own towns. The people commended all the men who volunteered to live in Jerusalem. These are the provincial leaders who settled in Jerusalem. And again, the rest of the chapter is a long list of names of the people who upped to sticks and moved into the city. So just to recap what is happening in this passage. The walls have been rebuilt, the gates are in place. Job number 1 for Nehemiah has now been completed. But we all know that a city is about way more than simply its boundaries and defences. A city has homes and schools and businesses and parkland and libraries and marketplaces and a social and economic infrastructure, and none of that exists in Jerusalem at present. If it does, what is there is pretty negligible. And so Nehemiah is asking some of the people, would you now give your lives, give the rest of your life to move into the city and help bring all of that to life? Will you give your lives now to making Jerusalem everything that it can be? Now, it needs to be said at the outset that this is one of the biggest requests yet that Nehemiah has made of the people. In fact, many of the commentaries describe this act as the most sacrificial of their entire lives. Why? Well, I want to draw an analogy from the life of Luciano Pavarotti, who, if you don't know, was one of the most successful operatic tenors of all time before his very sad death due to cancer in 2007. Pavarotti has sold over 100 million records. 100 million. In fact, in one evening alone in Central Park in New York, he performed to over 500,000. He opened the Football World Cup, he opened the Olympics, he considered amongst his friends everyone from Princess Diana to the head of the United Nations. Even since his death, millions more have still enjoyed his music. But it was never clear from the outset that Luciano Pavarotti would go into the music industry. In fact, for a long time, he toyed with becoming a teacher, going into the world of education. But early on in Pavarotti's life, his father took him aside and led him into a room in which was placed 2 chairs next to each other like this. And his father said this to him, "My son, if you try and sit between 2 chairs, you will eventually grow uncomfortable and fall between the middle of them. For your life, you must choose 1 chair." In other words, if you want to live with a sense of calling and passion, if you want to do something great with your life, you have to devote yourself to one thing rather than skimming the surface of life and trying to take on too much. Shortly before Pavarotti's death in 2007, he said this, "For life, I chose 1 chair. It took 7 years of study and frustration before I made my first professional appearance. It took another 7 to reach the Metropolitan Opera. And now I think, whether it's laying bricks, writing a book, whatever we choose, we should give ourselves to it. Commitment, that's the key. Choose 1 chair." That's what Pavarotti did with his life. He had to say no to a whole load of really good stuff in order to pursue the best. That is the ask that Nehemiah is making of the Jewish people. If you want your dreams for Jerusalem to come true, your wildest adventures in God to actually become reality, you've got to sacrifice an awful lot in order to see Jerusalem thrive. Now, what did they have to sacrifice to move into the city? Well, a number of things. Firstly, there was a massive financial cost. Most of the Jewish people were actually farmers. They owned fields and vineyards. And to move into Jerusalem, they'd have to give all of that up and very probably start a brand new trade from scratch. In fact, virtually all the commentaries agree that life in the rural settlements was much better for the Jewish people. More money, more land, more security. They had to give all of that up to move into Jerusalem. Secondly, there was a huge social cost. So to move into the city, you had to say goodbye to friends and family, many of whom you may have known for many decades, and start to get to know a whole load of other new people in Jerusalem. Thirdly, there's loads and loads and loads of hard work that needs to be done. It's not like you move into Jerusalem and suddenly waltz into your penthouse suite. The homes, we read, hadn't even been rebuilt. Businesses hadn't been started. Very likely there were building materials and rubble throughout all of the streets. Now you imagine the psychological and emotional weight. The walls are complete, the gates are in place, yes. Oh, but now the work has barely begun. It's a whole load of hard work that needs to be done. And fourthly, if you move into Jerusalem, you are much more likely to be attacked by the enemy nations round about. You see, the enemies of Israel don't really care about the rural farmers. They're no threat whatsoever. But if Jerusalem gets established, that is a real threat. You move into the city, you are much more likely to be attacked. So it stands to reason, why would anybody in their right mind give all of that up to move into the city? Well, to really understand that, you need to kind of get your head around the nature of Jerusalem. Just turn your brains on just for a couple of minutes, because Jerusalem was unlike any other city in the whole of the ancient world. You put the next map up. Most historians think Jerusalem was a very curious place to build a city. It wasn't located on a major waterway. It wasn't at the center of a great commercial crossroads. In fact, most historians think the main reason that Jerusalem existed was because of the temple. The temple was seen as the holiest place on earth. It was a visual depiction of God's dwelling place with people. You see, all the other cities in the ancient world were full of loads and loads and loads of temples. Jerusalem had just one. One city, one temple. That's a theological statement right there. It's like saying we've got the only true God. We've got the only real one. But, the temple in Jerusalem wasn't only the center of religious life. You see, in our lives today, we tend to compartmentalize different bits of our lives. I've got my work over here. I've got my friends over there. I've got my church involvement over there. The temple in Jerusalem in the ancient world, everything was kind of mixed in together. So the temple was also the center of the financial life in Jerusalem. In fact, all the records of all the debts in the city were stored there. The temple was the center of government. The temple was the center of their judicial system. The temple was the center of trade and economics. It wasn't like you did your job in the week and then wandered across to the temple to sing songs of praise to God at the weekend. No, everything was kind of mixed in together. In fact, if you put the next slide up, you can see the dominance of the temple over the rest of the city of Jerusalem. This was actually from the 1st century when Jesus walked the earth. The next slide is from above. Again, you see the scale and the scope of the temple compared to the rest of the city. History records it probably employed about 25% of the entire population of Jerusalem. But the next slide up, this is the Jerusalem of Nehemiah's day. Again, you see this big beast of a building that dominates everything else in the city. You meet somebody else, ask them, where do you work? Chances are they work in and at the temple. The temple was like the Houses of Parliament, Westminster Abbey, the Bank of England, and the Royal Courts of Justice all rolled into one. In fact, many commentators, Tom Wright would be among them, would put it like this. Jerusalem wasn't so much a city with a temple, but a temple with a city around it. But it grew to be the size of 35 football pitches. You see, in the temple city, everything that you did was different from every other city on the face of the earth. You have this sense of when I'm passing laws, or sentencing a criminal, or engaging in financial transactions, or starting a business. It's like God is right at the center of everything I'm doing. As a small tangent, I wonder how our Monday mornings might be slightly different if I was making a financial deal, or writing a newspaper article, or performing in a play with this sense of God right at the center of everything that I'm doing. And the temple for the Jewish people wasn't just something that happened in Jerusalem. As they lived that out, as they built businesses based on different ethics, as they passed laws with a greater value on people and equality for everyone, as they cared for the needy and the disadvantaged, it was like a miniature of the entire cosmos. And they were full of faith of the blessing and presence of God that happens in the temple city will one day spill out over the entire of creation, the entire earth. And so when you ask the question, why would people give up so much to move into Jerusalem? Why did we read in chapter 11, people even volunteered? I mean, think of the cost, but I'm going to volunteer to move into Jerusalem. The reason is that they get to be part of the most exciting venture on the face of the earth. I get to start my business, but my business here is different from every other city on the face of the earth. This is the temple city. God's involved here. That's what got them so excited. The best analogy I can come up with for this is marriage. When I got married to my wife Joy, I had to sacrifice a lot. Now, I know they tell you that when men and women get married, both have to sacrifice. That's true. But it's important you understand this. The man has to sacrifice more. If you want to have a happy marriage, he knows what I'm talking about. The man has to sacrifice more. And if you think, oh, shock, horror at what Andy is saying, I present as evidence exhibit A, the wedding day. Gents, it's important you get this. The wedding day is not your day. It's her day. It's all her day. Many grooms make the mistake on their wedding day that they wander into the church. On one side, it's her guests. On the other side, it's her guests from your friends and family she approves of. And you wander in, you think, hey, amazing people, beautiful building, wonderful flowers. I'm one half of the happy couple. This is part of my day, surely. No, not your day, all her day. Let's just take the wedding dress, for example. A woman's wedding dress is a thing of beauty. Costs hundreds, usually thousands of pounds. Before the big day itself, there are at least half a dozen separate fittings. Even after the wedding day, do you get rid of it? Oh, no. The wedding dress is lovingly, carefully cleaned, pressed, folded, sealed, wrapped in plastic, saved and preserved as an altar and shrine to take up space in your wardrobe for all of history. The groom's outfit is rented. And it's got to be back to the shop on Monday so some other poor soul can wear it the following weekend. Never mind, men, that 500 other blokes have got married in your suit. You're still special. No, you're not. 30 years from now, 50 years from now, my wife Joy can hold up that outfit and say, see, grandkids, Grandma got married in this. If I can do that, I'll be holding up a pair of underwear. That's all I've got left. Then take the ring, for example. A woman's ring is a thing of beauty, costs hundreds, thousands of pounds, sparkling, precious, valuable. My ring, £62.50. Most of the jewellery shops that Joy and I visited threw the groom's ring in free with hers. Why? Why? Because diamonds are a girl's best friend, yeah. Man's best friend is a dog. Who thought that up? Women thought that up, that's who. Girl's best friend, one of the most valuable, precious things on the planet. Man's best friend, so plentiful, we have to neuter them because we don't want any more. Wedding day is all her day. Let's be honest, blokes, she doesn't even really want you there. Let's be truthful. Yeah, she'll spend the rest of her life with you, sure, but if she could live that day as a princess without your sweaty body spoiling it, she'd do it every time. Now, here's the point. Here's the point. When I was standing at the front of the church on our wedding day, I was not thinking to myself, I wish I had a sparkly ring. When I was standing at the front of the church on my wedding day, I was not thinking, I wish I had an outfit to keep. No, when I was standing at the front of the church and Joy walked in, I'd not seen the dress before. I didn't look at that and think, how much did that cost? That came later. When Joy walked into the back of the church on my wedding day, I wasn't even thinking of the cost. I wasn't even thinking of the sacrifice. I just thought to myself, wow, I get her. This amazing, beautiful, incredible woman wants to spend the rest of her life with a geek like me. That is incredible. That is amazing. I'm going to get so many brownie points for this illustration later. There's every chance it's Guy movie, not Downton tonight. Anyway, here's the point. I'm not thinking of the cost. I'm thinking, wow, I get her. That is the best illustration that I can come up with for what is going on in Jerusalem in the 5th century BC, where men and women are saying, I don't care about the cost. I don't care about the sacrifice. I get him. I get to move into the temple city, where it's different from any other city on the face of the earth. I get God in the mix of my relationships, my family, my home, my community, my business, my workplace. This is the temple city. I get him. And Nehemiah structures everything in the city around this principle. Don't know about you, I found chapter 7, verse 1, a little bit comic. I mean, just picture the scene. Nehemiah, everyone come round everyone. Okay, well done for volunteering to live in Jerusalem. Just to be clear, you've got nowhere to live tonight because your homes aren't built. The streets are full of rubble. None of the businesses are started. Nowhere to buy food yet. And everyone out there wants to kill you. But don't worry, I've appointed the singers. If I was living in Jerusalem at this point in history, I'd be like, did he say singers? Is Nehemiah okay? Why on earth have we not got soldiers or builders or plumbers or entrepreneurs? Why has he appointed singers? It's because Nehemiah knows that everything in this city is different from every other city on earth. It all centers on him. This is the temple city. And the two men that he puts in charge of the whole city, number one, Hanani. Well, we first read about him in chapter 1. He's the guy who went 800 miles from Jerusalem to Susa in Persia when Nehemiah was based and said, hey, Nehemiah, that temple city, that reflection of what life's like when God's at the center, it's not as it should be. The walls are broken down. Use your influence. We've got to do something about it. Nehemiah thinks there's a man I can give responsibility to. Gives him control of half of the city. And the second guy is Hananiah, a man of integrity who feared God more than most men do. Hananiah knows God's at the center of this temple city. It's different from any other city on the face of the earth. That's what's going on in Jerusalem. It's the temple city. Here's the parallel for us. We don't have to go halfway around the world to Jerusalem now to experience a different kind of life because the temple's there. Why? Because of Jesus, the New Testament that says that we are the temple now. 1 Corinthians chapter 3 and verse 16 puts it like this. Don't you know that you yourselves are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in your midst? You see, I'm a living temple now, and I get to bring the presence of God into my home and my community and my relationships and my workplace. But here's the point. If you want to be the very best disciple that you can be, and our heart as a church right now is we do an outstanding job at making disciples. If you want your world to be genuinely different because you're a living temple and you're bringing God into it right now, then you have to choose a chair. You have to choose a chair. Let me explain. Nehemiah firstly called the people to a place. He said, give your lives to this city, the temple city. Now for you, it might be you give your life to a literal geographical place, a local community. It might be a workplace, your industry. It might be a particular people group. But if you want to see those situations different because you're bringing God into that situation, you've got to choose a chair. Let me illustrate. Let's just take your workplace, for example. If you want your workplace to be different because you're bringing God into it, because you're a living temple now, if you want to see people strive for better values than simply making money, people serving their colleagues rather than clambering over other people to get success, then it's not going to be changed by Friday. You've got to give your life to it. Get in early. Show you're committed. Serve your colleagues rather than gossiping about them behind their backs. Live differently. You've got to go for promotion, fail. Go for promotion, fail. Go for promotion, finally get it. And then in many decades' time, hand the baton on to somebody else who'll pick up where you leave off. You want your workplace to be different, you've got to choose a chair. Or what about your local community that's really on your heart and you want to see become a better place? You want neighbours to greet each other differently in the street. Children to be safe when they play. Marriages to be stronger. Family life to be different. It's not going to be different by this time next week, even though you're a living temple. You've got to give your life to it, earning the trust of the local neighborhood, building relationships, serving those around you. It is a lifelong work. You have to choose a chair. Many of you may remember the illustration I used 3 weeks ago about the Dream Center in Los Angeles. Amazing church. In the center of that city, just short of 300 different projects, a 24-hour campus, their own hospital, thousands gathering every week, and all in less than 20 years. One of my favorite quotes from that video was this, from the leader Matthew Barnett: "Those who stay around longest win the battle for influence." So obvious and yet so true. You really want to make your world the temple world because you're a living temple in it, you have to choose a chair. That's what's going on in Nehemiah. What might that look like in this city? I heard a brilliant example of this. It was actually on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle last month about a bus driver called Linda Wilson Allen. Linda Wilson Allen is a follower of Jesus, and she just loves the people who ride on her bus. She knows the regulars. She learns their names. In fact, if she drives past a bus stop and one of the regulars isn't there, she will pause the bus and wait for them to arrive and make up time later on her route. There's one lady called Ivy who was struggling with her shopping bags to get on the bus. Linda Wilson Allen stopped the bus, got out of the driver's seat, helped Ivy onto the bus with her shopping. Now, when Ivy needs to catch a bus, she will let other buses pass by until Linda's bus pulls up. One woman standing at a bus stop looking a little lost and alone. Linda Wilson Allen noticed, stopped the bus, got out of the driver's seat, got chatting to her. She wasn't in a very good place in life. Invited her around her own home for Thanksgiving to eat with her family. Her name was Tanya. Linda and Tanya are now friends. Every single passenger that rides on her bus, when they get off the bus, she thanks them for riding and tells them, "I love you." When was the last time you had a bus driver tell you they love you? Might be a bit creepy in some situations. According to the guy who wrote the article, who rides on her bus every day, he says Linda has built such a community on her bus that her passengers now offer her the use of their holiday homes and buy her plants and flowers and clothes. Now you think what a thankless task it is to drive a bus. Engine breakdowns, traffic jams, grumpy passengers. How does she live differently every day? According to the author of the article, her mood is set at 2:30 a.m. when she gets down on her knees to pray for 30 minutes. You know, people sometimes wonder, people sometimes ask, where, oh where can I find God's kingdom on earth as it is in heaven? I will tell you where it is. It is on the number 45 bus riding through San Francisco in California. That's where God's kingdom is. But of course, we all know, bus journey number 1 didn't look like that for Linda Wilson Allen. She's 58 years old now. She has given decades to getting to know people in her local community, earning the trust of her passengers, getting to know the routes, showing a different attitude when she arrives at work first thing in the morning. And eventually, after many decades, she's on the front page of the San Francisco Chronicle. She's chosen a chair. It just happens to be that her chair is the driver's seat of the number 45 bus. I want to ask each and every one of you, would you choose a chair? I actually want to ask unashamedly each and every one of you, would you commit to this city for the long term? That's the way it changes. And if you're thinking to yourself, I don't know where I'm going to be in 6 months or a year or 3 years, live as if you're going to be here. Live as if you're committed right now. People will notice the difference. Now, if you're looking to the long term and you're thinking, how do I do that? So many challenges. How on earth do you live for the long term in a city like this when there's just so many difficult bits about living here? Well, there's a little clue in Nehemiah Chapter 11, where in verse 1 and verse 18, Jerusalem is referred to as the holy city. You can easily miss it when you read the first time, but this is exceptionally rare outside of the prophetic literature in the Bible. Now, the prophetic literature in the Bible is essentially the books in the Bible where men and women would paint a picture of how wonderful the future would be with words. You can find examples in Isaiah chapter 52, Joel chapter 3, Revelation chapter 21, where men and women would dream of what Jerusalem would be when God's kingdom finally came in all its fullness and wonder and glory. Now, you think of these people in Jerusalem in the 5th century BC, homes not built, businesses not started, rubble all through the streets, and yet, they walk into Jerusalem saying this is a holy city. They're not looking at it as it is, they're dreaming of it as it will be. And to be honest, I don't know how you bring God's presence into your world, how you make a difference there because you're a living temple if you look at the challenges, if you look at the metaphorical rubble in the streets and the homes that aren't built yet. But if you dream of your world, your workplace as a holy workplace or a holy local community, that's how you live with faith for the future. I love the story of how Times Square Church got started in New York. Started by a guy called David Wilkerson, all kind of kicked off in the 1960s. And as you can imagine, it's not easy to get a prime piece of land in a place like Times Square in New York. Not easy for us to get a property in Leicester Square, for example. How on earth do you do it? David Wilkerson knew that if I want to see this city change, for all the challenges, I need to commit for the long term. And I trust, because I'm a living temple now, that if there are needs, God will provide. He writes this, and I just found this so inspiring. God's presence has been with me in spite of myself. When we started Times Square Church in New York, the presence of Christ emanated from us in all we did. I remember walking into a famous Broadway producer's office in search of a theatre to use as a church. This man's secretaries and staff scoffed at me. Their words and attitudes assured me, a lowly minister, I wouldn't be able to get an appointment. In fact, I thought I might even get kicked out. But then the producer came out of his office, and when he saw me, he invited me in. Over the next several weeks, the producer and I got to know each other. At times, he would look across his desk at me and say, I don't know why I'm spending so much time with you. My schedule's absolutely full. But whenever I walked into his office suite, his secretary pushed me past all other visitors saying, go right in, Reverend, he's waiting for you. Eventually, this man sold his flagship theatre to us to use for Times Square Church. Even as he was signing the documents of sale, he said, "I don't know why I'm doing this." It was only God's presence that moved him to sell that building to us. Just a few years after the deal was done, he and his lawyers were begging to buy it back. I saw God change other people's hearts as well. The man who owned the building next to ours refused to sell it to us as an annex. But over time, he became a friend of mine and eventually sold us the building as well. All along, he kept telling me, "Somebody up there is working for you." That is the power of the presence of God. And every Christian can testify in the same way. God's presence with me has done great things. I do not know how we overcome every challenge if we commit to this city for the long term. I mean, the property one, both individually and corporately, is massive. How do we get a building? I have absolutely no idea. But I do know this, that we are living temples now. That we get to bring God's presence into everything that we do. And therefore, I trust if we need that in due course, then I guess he's going to provide. That's how you live and commit to something for the long term. How does your workplace change? I don't know. But it can be a holy workplace in due course. Why? Because you're a living temple now. Couple of self-evident points I felt I should make. Number one, notice how mundane and ordinary it is to choose a chair. To bring Jerusalem to life, to see all their dreams come true for that city, was not supernatural at all. It involved repairing a house, or cleaning the streets, or starting a business. Very unspiritual. It involved driving a number 45 bus every single day with a different attitude. Same for us. I love what Pastor Leslie Newbigin says. My favourite quote of the autumn term so far: "Growth is a slow, secret, unspectacular affair." If you choose a chair, if you choose to give yourself to one thing for the long term, you are being called to slow, secret, unspectacular days. Are you up for that? Like Pavarotti, 7 years of hard work before you get your first professional appearance. No one even knows of you, and you've worked for 7 years. You up for that kind of hard work? Second self-evident point is that the same commitment that you need to give to a workplace or industry or a local community is the same commitment that you need to give to people if you want community to be everything that it can be. Every single person here, myself included, has a deep longing for family, a deep need of community. How do you get it? You pick a small group of people and you commit to them for the long term. That's what family is, isn't it? Through all the irritations, through all the fights over what do we watch on TV tonight, the FA Cup final or a Disease of the Week movie. I mean, what do you work out? Family is, through all the irritations, we're here for the long term. Would you do that here too? It's interesting, the makeup of Jerusalem at this point in time. Put the next slide up. You've got actually people who returned a few weeks ago to rebuild the wall and people who'd been there for 8 decades. I mean, you just imagine the tension. We've been here for decades. We've got more right to be here than you. Well, we've just turned up. We're the ones that got the wall built. What were you doing for 80 years? And yet, to build something different in the temple city, they worked through all of that to do something great. Easy application here. If you've been around a long time in Christchurch, would you open your life to 2 or 3 new people? Oh, but I've got my friendship group. So hard getting to know someone. Let's build a living temple here. Let's build a different kind of community. And if you're new and you're searching for community, maybe you've been around a few months, and it's not quite clicked for you yet, don't think that by simply jumping elsewhere, you'll find the friendships that your heart so desperately needs. Stick with it. Stick with us. We've had a whole load of new people join the church recently. Would you stick it through? Let's build a different kind of community here. And as a small aside, I just felt I should throw this added bonus in. It's not really from the text. One of the ways that we can commit to the long term and live like we're putting down roots and we're dreaming of the long-term future is by investing in children. Because in 30 and 40 years' time, they will have way more influence in this city than anyone in this room. What is happening out in this building right now that's unseen and secret and unspectacular is actually extraordinary. We need more volunteers there right now. We actually need a female youth worker right now. It's a great way of saying I am investing for the long-term future because I trust that this city will one day be a holy city. One last illustration, then I'm done. It's about a guy in America called Rick Hoyt. When Rick was born, he was strangled by his umbilical cord and didn't get enough oxygen to the brain and was seriously brain damaged. In fact, doctors essentially gave up on him, put him in an institution at 11 months, said he'd be a vegetable for the rest of his life. His parents, who were called Dick and Judy, refused to give up on him. They chose a chair. Their chair just happened to be their own son. To cut a long story short, after fighting and campaigning and challenging the doctors, they eventually proved that there was some brain activity going on in Rick's brain. And they managed through the doctors to connect him to a machine that helped him to communicate. Fast forward a few years, Rick is now 11 years old. And he notices that in the local community a fun run is happening, a 5-mile fun run. And through his computer, he says to his dad, "Dad, I'd love us to run together in that race." His dad thinks to himself, "I'm overweight. I've not run a marathon for years. How on earth can I do it pushing my son? Nonetheless, I've committed here. I'll do it." Began to run the race, 5 miles. They came in next to last. But at the end of that mini marathon, Rick said to his father, "Dad, when we were running that race, you and me together, it felt like I wasn't disabled anymore." That sentence changed his father's life. And he decided to give himself to helping his son experience that emotion as often as he possibly could. By 1979, they were ready to run in their first Boston Marathon. They ran it in such a quick time, they qualified automatically for the next year's marathon. After it, someone said to them, "Why don't you try a triathlon?" His father, Dick, thought, "How on earth can I do that? I've not ridden a bike since I was 6. How can I haul my disabled son through the water when I'm swimming?" Nonetheless, he thought, "I've chosen my chair. I'm giving my life to my son. I'll do it anyway." Fast forward to the year 2013. Dick Hoyt is now 73. His son Rick is now 51. They have now competed in over 240 triathlons, including 4 15-hour grueling Ironman contests in Hawaii. Their best time, incidentally, is only 35 minutes off the world record, which, by the way, is held by somebody who wasn't pushing a wheelchair at the same time. Here is a minute-long video giving you a brief taster of their amazing story.
Rick and I love the Ironman triathlon. To be out there competing with the best triathletes in the world, to be accepted to compete along with these triathletes. Just to be out there on that pier with all the other triathletes and then waiting in the water for that cannon to go off. It was just so exciting. The feeling coming down the finish line at Leaky Drive, it's just an awesome experience. With the crowd there, all the excitement, the noise, and the announcers announcing, all the adrenaline just gets flowing.
I may be disabled, but I live a very fulfilling life. And if someone takes the time to get to know me, they will realize that I am no different than anyone else.
Our message is, yes, you can. You can do anything you want to do as long as you make up your mind. You can do it.
One of the reasons that I love that story is that in some ways it's just so ordinary. Father just runs a few races with his son. And yet in some ways it's just so extraordinary. Documentaries are now made about them. Articles written. There's a statue now in Boston commemorating their amazing journey together. Why? When I first watched that video, the tears rolled down my face. Because I don't think society at large knows much about that kind of commitment. Where one man says, for the next 5 decades of my life, I will give myself, I will choose a chair, I will give myself to my son. And when you live with commitment like that, the world takes notice. I want to ask you, would you choose a chair? I don't know what it is for you. We'd love to help you find out what your chair is. That you would commit yourself to slow and secret and unspectacular days. The other reason I love that illustration so much is that one of the metaphors for the Christian walk is it's like running a race. Of course, we get weary and tired, close to burnout. But we have this big, strong Father who never gives up on us. Close with this verse from Acts chapter 20, where Paul says this, I know that in every city the Holy Spirit warns me that prison and hardships are facing me. However, I consider my life worth nothing to me. My only aim is to finish the race and complete the task the Lord Jesus has given me. Wherever you move, whatever city you go to, whatever workplace or community you commit to, metaphorical prison and hardships await you. Would you choose a chair anyway and give yourself to it? And this is not meant to be a gimmick, but I'm standing on a chair just because you'll forget 90% of what I say in probably 20 minutes after the sermon. But maybe you'll remember, the Andy standing on a chair sermon. What am I going to give my life to? And just to be clear, when you choose one chair, you say no to a whole load of really good stuff. Would you live with that kind of commitment? Would you choose a chair? Maybe the band want to come up? Why don't we all stand?